Could you ever imagine that a simple bottle of water could cause such a commotion? I definitely didn't, but Karen from the HOA is ready to do anything to get her way. I naively thought she was just trying to do the right thing, but with every step she took, I realized this wasn't just greed. It was personal. Now I know how far someone will go when they feel like they have the right to take what isn't theirs. All her manipulation, lies, and complaints, it all ended with one big, unforgettable downfall when I, at work, watching the security cameras on my property, couldn't believe my eyes. Crazy Karen had gone too far. But let me start from the beginning. But before I share all the details of this incredible story with you, I'd like to ask you to click on the like button if you're interested, as it really helps us to grow the channel and share more stories like this. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any more videos in the future. And if you don't mind, leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We'd love to know where our viewers are from. Now, let's get started with this story. I moved into my neighborhood about 3 years ago. It's a small place with everything needed for a peaceful life, or at least, that's what I thought. Everything was going great until the HOA showed up. At first, they just caused me a little more trouble than necessary, wrong parking, and the police would show up, or new rules that nobody took seriously. But this was nothing compared to what happened that fall. In recent months, our neighborhood started having constant issues with water supply. First, it was out for a couple of hours, then a few days without water, and then we got a message from the local government saying that the water system needed long-term repairs. I'm not one to panic. The pandemic taught me to be ready for anything. So I decided to stock up on bottled water online. Water that wouldn't spoil and would definitely come in handy in situations like this. But that wasn't enough for Karen, the HOA leader who had always treated me coldly. She could never really explain her dislike for me, but her attitude was clearly insincere. And so, one morning, the water delivery guy dropped off my order and stacked the bottles near the fence to avoid cluttering up the house. It was the perfect spot, shaded, where the water would stay cool and fresh. That same day, they shut off the water for a few days. After work, when I got home, I noticed something strange. Karen and another HOA member were standing on the road near my house, slightly hiding behind a tree on my property, having a heated discussion and occasionally taking photos. I approached them and asked, "Can I help you, ladies?" They pretended not to hear me. Then I added, I see you're not just walking around but also taking photos. Or maybe you'd like me to help you find a better spot for your photo shoot." They suddenly disappeared, shooting me a nasty look, but I was in a great mood and thought my light sarcasm wasn't meant to offend anyone seriously. A few hours later, I got an email from her, and yes, it was really from her. Instead of the usual request or recommendation, she wrote that, according to some community rule, all resources must be equally distributed among the residents. And if I didn't agree to do this by the next day, serious consequences awaited me. Laughing, but also with a bit of anxiety in my heart, I realized this was probably going to be something serious. The morning seemed normal, although a little gloomy, but when I left for work and saw her, things quickly changed. Karen was standing by my mailbox, almost like she was waiting for me. She looked at me with cold, piercing eyes, and on her face was a forced smile that promised nothing good. She looked at me as if I were a child, about to be told how to live properly. It was clear that she had been waiting for this moment. "So, have you decided to do something about the water?" she asked, smiling. But the smile was so fake and pushy that I barely stopped myself from making a joke. I could already feel my heart tightening from her audacity. But I replied as calmly as possible, though still surprised. "This is absurd. The water is my personal property, and I'm not required to share it with anyone. I think you understand that the law is on my side." Anyone in my position would have understood that she was trying to create an artificial conflict. But her reaction was quick and sharp. Her smile instantly disappeared, and her face turned as cold as ice. She came closer to me and almost hissed. "Then we live by different laws. If you refuse, prepare for consequences that will make you regret your disgusting greed." She looked at me as if I had just committed the greatest crime in human history. And in her eyes, I saw not just anger, but a full readiness to destroy me if I didn't follow her rules. This wasn't just an argument about water. It was her battle for control, for making sure everyone in this neighborhood bowed to her. I was sitting at work when suddenly a notification appeared on my screen about a new email. I wasn't surprised, thinking it was just another reminder from Karen about her pointless complaints. But when I opened the email, I noticed her brief yet nasty message. "I've filed a complaint with the inspector. Everyone must follow the rules, including you." I laughed. Maybe Karen didn't understand that something as trivial as water wasn't worth her attention. If only I had more time for this circus, I thought, and sent the email to the archive, going back to my work. But just 20 minutes later, another notification. I wasn't ready for what I was about to read. From Karen, "Come home immediately. You need to answer for your actions." I started to feel frustrated. How much more can she manipulate people? I thought, checking the time. It was still morning and she was already making a scene. 20 minutes later, a new email. I opened it and felt my patience vanish. "I'm waiting for your response. I'm not alone. My allies are also waiting for you." What does this even mean? Allies? Why are more people in my life deciding they can control my decisions? I started losing patience because she wasn't just distracting me from work, she was invading my life like a virus. And then another email came, and it wasn't just crazy, it was outright absurd. "I'm officially declaring a public opinion court. There will be other residents present who are endlessly upset by your actions." I barely held back a laugh, but at the same time, I realized her anger was becoming a real threat. I could already imagine them all gathering by my door, ready to judge me for my greed. Or maybe this was just another psychotic episode of Karen's, raising even more questions about why I was still dealing with this situation. Not able to read more of these emails, I decided to take a break. But at that moment, another email appeared on my screen, sent less than 10 minutes later. "This is your final warning. You have no right to keep resources for yourself, and this will be dealt with." That phrase finally made me snap. I grabbed my things, walked to the office secretary, and asked her to tell my boss that I had some unexpected circumstances and might need to leave early. "Can I work from home for part of the day?" I added, mentioning it was an HOA issue. I caught the understanding look from the assistant, and with a nod of approval, she indicated that I should go and deal with this mess. I didn't want it to seem too serious, but there was only one thought in my mind. Karen had gone too far, and I couldn't leave this without a response. As I approached my house, it became clear something was going on. I could hear loud shouting from the yard, and soon I realized it was like a protest. A group of people was standing on my property, holding signs. They were trying to shout slogans, but their voices were weak, uncertain, and quiet. It was like a circus of the ridiculous, where everyone was trying to shout over each other, but no one could say anything meaningful. Among them, I noticed a few familiar faces. One was my elderly neighbor, who always tried to act like a know-it-all and spoke with expert opinions whenever possible. Another was Karen's old acquaintance, who looked completely awkward in his stance, like he was just placed there for show. I realized they joined this ridiculous spectacle for some selfish reasons. Some feared losing their jobs in the HOA, others just didn't have the strength to refuse Karen, and some probably were there because of personal connections. But at the head of all this was Karen, holding a hastily made sign that read, "Water for all." As soon as I got closer, I started hearing her scream that my pantry might not be in good condition and that it might contain more products than allowed. Seeing me, Karen quickly approached, not giving me a chance to speak. "It's time to check your pantry. How are you storing your supplies? I must make sure your food isn't violating the rules." I was in complete shock from what was happening. Opening my mouth, I quickly glanced at the pathetic meeting of 5 people standing there without any enthusiasm, silent. Blocking the entrance to my house, which Karen was aiming to check, I flushed with anger. And Karen, switching to an even more disgusting tone, began shouting right in my face, "I'll manage without your pantry. Let's go back to the water. According to the rules, your water reserves cannot exceed 10 gallons per house." Karen didn't even wait for my reaction and continued. "Also, If water is stored in an open space, it is no longer considered private property. I couldn't believe my ears. Now she decided that my garage and yard were all part of her public property. She picked up one of the water bottles because, in her opinion, water bottles shouldn't spoil the neighborhood's aesthetic. This is terrible. Bottles like these are a disgrace. We live in a civilized community, not a junkyard. You must remove them immediately because they spoil the look. Suddenly, one of the neighbors, who apparently came to support her, started inspecting my water supplies, insulting me for my nest of greed. This was too much. While Karen and her allies went through my packages and counted the bottles, I realized I needed to call for backup, specifically a lawyer. At that moment, everything started to escalate into complete absurdity. Before I could respond, she started pulling at my windows, trying to check if I was hiding any more water. My lawyer's line was busy and I began calling again. Then one of Karen's supporters grabbed her by the sleeve and she noticed I was talking to someone. Her eyes narrowed and her nostrils flared. "You're selfishly hoarding resources during a crisis!" Her voice was filled with rage. "This is wrong and unpatriotic. People around you are without water and you're taking everything for yourself. You need to get rid of part of your reserves for the good of the residents of your community." Although I was ready to stand my ground, I saw the disapproving looks around me. Neighbors, who had just been silent, now started getting upset. "Exactly! Why should he keep everything for himself?" one of them shouted. I heard a few nods, and more people started actively supporting her, throwing glances like they were tired of staying quiet. "You can't do this! It's unfair!" a woman from the next house cried out, waving her hands. Though these cries were weak and few, Karen, seeing that her words were getting some response, didn't stop. She continued to point at my supplies, constantly repeating about my greed and unpatriotism. But just as I was about to say something, Karen suddenly turned sharply and started silently walking to the exit of the yard. Her allies, without saying a word, only gave me a disapproving look and started trailing after her. She left behind a sense of complete chaos and loss of control. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "This isn't going to end like this. You've invaded my property, and you're the ones breaking the law." Karen and her team didn't turn around, but her figure was clearly visible against the background of the gate. She probably didn't hear my words, but I knew next time she would face the consequences. And I wasn't about to be the one who backs down, even if it seemed like everyone around me was supporting her. After having a cup of coffee, I calmed down a bit, and just then my lawyer called me. I described the whole situation and tried to understand if there was a way to legally stand my ground. He was calm but clear. From a legal standpoint, Karen and her group had no right to claim my private property, even if it involved water during a crisis. He explained that such actions could be considered violations of property rights. His advice was simple: don't let them onto my property, and if they try again, call the police or file a lawsuit for illegal trespassing. By evening, everything was quiet. No new emails or unexpected visitors. I naively thought that Karen would stop bothering me and switch her focus to more important HOA matters. However, the next morning I realized that for Karen, nothing was more important than my water now. She was standing at my gate with an angelic look, waiting for me to come out when I was leaving for work. This time, she decided to change tactics and be as polite as possible. "I came for a bottle of water," she started, pointing at the packages. "I need to check what kind of water it is, because there are some suspicions that it might be forbidden." I raised my eyebrows. "What do you mean, forbidden? It's just water." The only thought in my head was, maybe Karen is using something forbidden herself, considering the ideas she has. I continued firmly. "I had a conversation with my lawyer, and I have every right not to let you onto my property. There's no reason for you to take my water for testing." At this point, she sharply turned around, and her ally, the HOA inspector, the same guy who had helped her with those absurd new HOA rules, appeared from behind the corner. He was clearly ready to back up her demands. I didn't want to listen to them. I was late for work, and I had already had enough of this absurdity. "Yes, we have the right to check your supplies," said the inspector, trying to sound authoritative, though I doubted his qualifications. "I've brought a valid document," he continued, pulling out a thin piece of paper from his portfolio, which stated something about my obligations to the neighborhood committee. Karen and her inspector tried to look even more persistent, and I could see how they exchanged glances, as if waiting for me to give in. But I couldn't let them control my life like that. Trying to stay calm, I confidently began defending my territory and threatened to call the police, because that paper had no legal power. So, in a moment, this could have been the end of the story. The inspector tried to smooth things over by suggesting leaving the documents and sorting it out later. I headed to work, purposefully locking the gate, which I usually didn't lock because there was no need. But after the protests and how actively Karen had been interested in my situation recently, it felt like the right thing to do. So, leaving them on my doorstep with their requests and papers, I confidently walked to work, though inside I was worried about what would happen next. The most interesting part started when Karen saw a small gap in my fence, which seemed to her like the perfect way to get the water without attracting attention. She couldn't miss such an opportunity, even if it meant violating my boundaries. She grabbed a large pack of water and climbed over the fence without hesitation. At first, everything went smoothly, and if it had continued that way, I probably wouldn't have found out about it. But when she tried to grab the top of the fence, she got caught on the metal parts and got stuck. Her attempts to free herself were useless. Her whole body was stuck between the posts, and the water bottles scattered on the ground as she desperately tried to get free. I was sitting at the office when I got a notification from the security cameras, which reacted to movement, or rather to the destruction of property, in this case, the fence. On the screen appeared Karen, stuck in the fence, with a water bottle that was now scattered across the yard. She was trying to free herself, but her movements were clumsy. I quickly called the police, realizing I couldn't wait any longer. Karen was on my property, and this had gone beyond any boundaries, so I rushed home. At that moment, Karen started yelling for help and shouting the name of her HOA inspector, the same guy with the paper. By coincidence, he happened to be passing nearby, as he lived 2 houses down from me. He quickly ran to the fence, then ran off, and after a couple of minutes came back with a chainsaw in his hands. Karen screamed like a madwoman, "Be careful, Sam! Don't hurt me!" But the inspector seemed very careful, because he only started cutting the fence around her body, not getting the saw too close to her. But this didn't solve the problem at all. It made it worse. In just a few seconds, he completely destroyed the fence, which ended up lying on the ground in pieces. Karen screamed, but now red with rage, she grabbed the saw and started wildly throwing the water bottles, which were spilling like fountains across the yard. "You couldn't even free me properly!" She was blaming the inspector, and her eyes had lost any sign of logic. Now it looked like a scene from some devilish comedy. Karen was jumping on the bottles, as if it were the last fun she would ever have, and shouting with all her might. She was yanking the chainsaw and tearing the bottles apart. It was at this moment that I was running to the scene and heard the sound of police sirens approaching my house. They arrived at the same time as me. What we saw, a destroyed fence. Karen, who seemed to have lost her mind, tearing up bottles with the chainsaw like Othello screaming at Desdemona, "If not for me, then no one will have you." I was speechless, and the police officer, seeing Karen freeze when she saw the cops, quickly grabbed her arms, from which the saw fell, and handcuffs appeared on her wrists. As a result, Karen was sentenced to 6 months in prison. The court found that she had broken several laws, including illegal trespassing on private property, destroying property, and using a chainsaw in a public place, which caused significant damage. Additionally, I filed a lawsuit for compensation for her vandalism, the destroyed fence and ruined water bottles. She was forced to pay the full amount. It was satisfying to watch her face in court when she received the verdict. This time, she couldn't distort reality with her manipulations. All the people who had supported her at the protest showed up in court on the side of the prosecution and pretended like they had never been friends with Karen. And by irony, the water was restored the very same day. There were no more shutoffs. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button. Your support really helps. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, so you don't miss more stories like this. Because as this situation shows, the world needs more justice and fewer Karens.